This is episode 6 of the Joy Mattina podcast. Today we have Charles Morgan. Just to give a little context here, Charles and I met at Burning Man just in 23. I co-lead a camp called Buddha Lounge, and I met Charles there. We focus on breathwork, meditation, chiropractic, bodywork, and yoga. And a campmate, Charles, you got connected through someone else in the camp, I believe, and you came in and did your breathwork meditation type workshops. And unfortunately, I never got to experience them because while you were doing your thing, I was always doing my thing. But I would love to learn more about it. Really excited to have you on and hear about all the stuff you're working on in that world of neuroplastic training. So welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joy. It's really exciting. We had such a good time at Burning Man. Thank you for coming to my wedding that happened at the end there.
Oh yeah. Amazing.
So I didn't get to do a chiropractic session, and you didn't get to do the sonic acupuncture, but we did have a beautiful little experience there at the longest future. Burn.
So listen, I don't know a ton about what you do, but I'm excited to learn more. I'm kind of curious. So what is kind of your mission statement? I guess if to start it off, like what do you do? What are your workshops in a nutshell?
Yeah, well, the mission statement is like the really big, hairy place to start. I would say that on the fundamental level, what my workshop is doing, we call it sonic acupuncture. It is the most, I don't want to say that it is the most advanced, but we really tried really hard to make it as advanced as possible, given everything we know about the neuroscience of various things that contribute to flow states. And flow states are a very popular area of research in the neuroscience world, in the positive psychology world, in the action adventure sports athlete world, even in the business world. People are talking about, how do I get more flow? How do I get more flow? And we're almost using it in this colloquial sense, but it really is a neurochemical state where your mind is in peak performance, where you learn things faster, you remember things faster, you're more creative, you're nicer, you're like you're just like, everything is better about you. And how do we do it? How do we do it? I mean, and I was introduced to this work in 2013. I was training to run the Boston Marathon, and I was listening to an audiobook, and it was Stephen Kotler's The Rise of Superman. And so, like, on those long runs to train for this marathon, I was just like, I basically listened to this whole book. And it was my senior year of university, and I had decided that when I left college, I would just completely optimize my life on flow triggers, as he called them. And this has been, I guess the writing of this book that's being published this year, that I wrote.
That's your book, Don't Punk Out?
Yeah, the book, Don't Punk Out. Yeah, I wrote it last year, and it's with the publisher now. The manuscript is with the editor, so we should have a release date anytime now. But this book is the result of 10 years of personal experimentation and like complete skepticism. And I feel like a lot of people enter the realm of spirituality either from a very early age, thanks to their family, or through the mechanism of some kind of like intense personal suffering, some kind of intense, like I lost everything, but at the bottom of the hole, there was God, right? And this is a very common story that you hear in the spiritual path. But I really got into it as a high performance junkie. Like I went to a top university. I got the big fancy job that my Chinese mother wanted me to get. I was just like trying to eke out productivity and trying to be like, I don't know, just my ego. I was just being completely in my ego, getting into spiritual practice because this one guy wrote this book that said yoga is one of the strongest flow triggers known to mankind. It was like there's like a lot of things that get you into flow, and they have all these different, I think they have like 17 different flow triggers. But he specifically talked about rock climbing, surfing, and yoga as the 3 sort of physical activities that hit every single flow trigger at once. Right. And so in sort of my mind, the way I talk about it is there's shallow flow states and there's deeper flow states. and there's a reproducible method to get into these levels of flow. And as you go deeper, the learning improvement, the memory recall, the creativity, it gets exponentially bigger as you go from level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And, you know, from what I describe in my book, we've got 8 flow states, and you know, it just gets more and more quantum and non-local the further that you go. But yeah,
Were you an
that was
athlete
kind of
in college or before?
I was, yeah. I played Little League baseball,
Yeah.
and I was left-handed, so that was my thing for most of my life. First base and pitcher. But then in high school, I really was just much better at football. I don't know. I really wanted to play baseball, but I was just, you know, I wasn't getting recruited for baseball, so I was recruited for football, and I ended up playing football in college, and that was great. But just got injuries. You know, I've had surgery on 3 of my 4 limbs, and those injuries, they still bother me to this day randomly. They'll just like crop up here, crop up there. I'm 2 weeks off my feet, you know, and that was also a big driver when it came to this kind of like, you know, after leaving university, I've really felt a lot of pressure on myself as a 22-year-old to like figure out like, how am I going to age gracefully? Right? Because like everyone was talking about post-athlete depression, like what do you do with your body once you're working in a, like literally I was working at a software company in Silicon Valley, you know, just like one of the big ones, and like went from working out 5 hours a day to 0. And so I was feeling that stress, feeling that anxiety, and I was like, I'd read this book about the flow states. I was like, you know what, I just need to like every day just find some different yoga class that's in the neighborhood, that's convenient, you know. And I'd also read that book Atomic Habits. I'm not sure exactly in the timeline when I read it, but I remembered thinking, you know, I put it together in my head. I was like, okay, if yoga is one of the best flow state inducers, and is also the sport where its participants can do it into their old age, and they don't have injuries, and it's not causing injuries, right? Like it just seems good for someone that has a lot of injuries. And so, yeah, so I just
And so
made my
what do you
atomic habit finding these yoga classes, and I just sampled the whole menu. And because I was a scientist in university, I studied material science, electrical engineering, like I came at the whole spiritual field with very much a, you know, scientific mind. Like literally I was keeping lab notebooks, and I was observing, you know, making observations after I'd get home from the yoga studio, and, you know, like what felt good, like what didn't work, what this thing and that thing. And, you know, that went on for years, until I discovered this niche style of yoga that they called Kundalini yoga at the time. And Kundalini is the name that the yogis have for the the coiled serpent energy that is the fundamental life force of the human body. And I'm just like, yeah, fundamental life force, whatever. Whatever you go, whatever gets your socks rocking, you know, what's up with this yoga? And so we get there, and it's, you know, the teacher explains that this style of yoga is focused completely on the meditation and breathing side of yoga. And at this point, I've been doing yoga for 3 years, pretty consistently. Had never heard about the breathing and meditation side of yoga. I was like, I thought yoga was just, you know, stretching and proprioception and balance and all these amazing things that are getting me into flow states. Like, no, there's actually these other places that you can go. And I was like, oh, okay. So I do one class, and I leave this class, and I'm just like stoned, like full on, like the experience. I remember writing in my lab notebooks, like I literally feel stoned right now. Like I feel as high as I did after I ran the marathon. This was November 2015, so it's 2 years after running the marathon. I ran the Boston Marathon in 2013, the year of the bomb. And yeah, so it's 2 years later, and I'm just like, wow, this is like runner's high, right? And then that kind of like this experience was just like completely shifted my perspective about what yoga could be. And so I kept going to these classes every city that I was traveling in. I would go and I would find this Kundalini yoga. And it was a very niche thing at the time. Like nobody was doing breath work in 2015, 2016. Like nobody was, talking about, people had like holotropic breathing, and people had like transcendental meditation and Vedic meditation and various kinds of Buddhist meditation that I had participated in. But nobody was doing these vigorous, like, these forced hyperventilation things, and nobody was doing it. And it was, I was very grateful to have found it, because it didn't take very long. And I had a full on, like, in the proper yoga vocabulary, they call them a jhana. But in the sort of experience of a young guy going to this class, I had a full-on meditation-induced acid trip. It was the craziest experience psychedelically that I had had up to that point in my life. It was like, and in university, we played hard, like we like, I had done acid, I had done mushrooms, always in like, under the guidance of the older guys in the fraternities. Like, so we were I was actually in like a very safe container when it came to someone's like on ramp into hard drugs. But all these drugs now are being like, tested for treatment of PTSD, and there's a reason. And we'll get into like sort of the deep neuroscience of that stuff later. But like I had done mushrooms, acid, MDMA, like combinations thereof, and they were great. They're beautiful experiences. But this November 2015 Kundalini yoga induced hallucination was, it's still very impossible to describe.
Was this in a class with other folks?
This is in a class with other people. It was on a Wednesday at the end of a work day. I had not, had a drink that day. I had not smoked a joint. My last cup of coffee was maybe at like 3 o'clock. So I go to this class at 7 p.m. Objectively, this class ended at 8:30 p.m. But my subjective experience, and the way these classes are structured is like you do this like round of vigorous breathing for like 2 to 5 minutes, and then you have this period where you like hold your breath, and it's called the kumbhaka. And then after the kumbhaka, you do this like powerful exhale. And the physical experience of supersaturating your blood with oxygen and then depriving it of oxygen and then returning to baseline. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's there's not that many words for it, but what some physiologists, I guess I don't know their specific discipline, but in 2019, some scientists won the Nobel Prize for the discovery that moving from states of extreme oxygenation to extreme oxygen deprivation and oscillating back and forth stimulates the body's natural production of EPO. EPO is the blood doping agent that Lance Armstrong used to win all those Tour de France's, right? And it was shocking when I saw that paper, because by that point, this is 4 years later, I'd been really, really into it, really like indoctrinating myself in the neuroscience of things and the physiology of things and the chemical pathways that were happening in my brain to explain this insane trip that I had. Like I was still a participating rational member of society, and I just could not forget what happened to me. Like I woke up in this class and I'm just like looking around at the other people. I was like, did you just, because I was experienced, like I had hallucinated that the class ended, that I continued with my life, that the next day had began, that I decided to break up with my girlfriend that I was with at the time, that I was single and like moving through life, experience like traveling, like going through the airport security, showing up in a different, all the way to the point that like I had gotten married and I had met my children, right? And then like I felt a cannonball, like a breath hold, like my body had like completely like, I don't know, but then somehow I would get reminded of like, I would hear the teacher say cannonball breath. And I would just like shift into a new timeline with a different looking wife and different looking kids. And we just continue going through the day, like taking them to school, you know, going to my work, right, picking them up from school, right, and then another, you know, off in the distance, cannonball breath, and I would be in another timeline, this time with kids and no wife, right, and then another time, and I was just like, are you fucking, what the hell? And then at the end of the class, she was playing the gongs to like come back, and I was like, I remember being in one of the time things like, no, I'm not done yet, there's so much here to explore. And yeah, I came back and I was just like, no way.
Unbelievable.
There's no way. Did you feel that? You know, and I just remember being on the subway home, thinking like, wow, you know, my life is not going to be the same after this. You know, like I will dedicate my life to figuring out what just happened to me. And because it wasn't just informative, it was also pure infinite joy. It
felt
like
good, huh?
it was like total, you know, what people talk about when they're on high dosages of acid, about like complete non-separation, like one with the universe is I, like the whole thing, like the gods, the demons, like the sacred geometry, like I saw it, you know. I get it, guys. It's amazing, but 99% of what these spiritual people are doing is actually not contributing to their mental health or their physical health. And the reason for that, and I go into it in a deep way in the book, is that the hippie movement, you know, while it introduced a lot of these practices into Western culture, it was introduced improperly. And I say improperly as an umbrella term for, in some cases, the books were mistranslated. So in English, we actually use incorrect words to describe some of these ancient practices and how to do them. I say improper because there were fake gurus that saw the opportunity to, you know, use their, you know, cultural mystique to gain prestige in a new environment. And the master of this lineage of yoga that I was trained in, like I sought out teachers. I sought like teachers, like as teachery teachers as I could find, as guru of gurus as I could find, right? And I like would, you know, I'd find the limits of one teacher and I'd be like, thank you, master, and I move on. Like find the next teacher, thank you, man, move on, right? And it wasn't until that 2020 that the main guru of this Kundalini yoga, you know, very niche, but still empire, was completely disgraced. A PhD in religious studies who had experienced the dramatic changes, physically, spiritually, mentally, from Kundalini yoga, he decided to write his PhD thesis on the historical origin of Kundalini yoga. And in digging into the origin of this practice, there were some dots that weren't connecting. And he found out that our esteemed guru, Yogi Bhajan, was like a baggage handler or like a customs officer at LAX. The stories are unclear. There's different stories on the internet, right? And he noticed all these white people in LA getting, you know, taken by these people that were not real yogis, not real gurus. So he was like, oh, I could do this. All right. So he took this yoga textbook that he brought over with him from India, went to the LA County Public Library, photocopied the pictures, and then wrote his own text in there. That week, he picked up 6 students. And from there, like the whole Kundalini Research Institute was born, this foundation that basically,
oh my gosh,
this foundation turned into almost like a startup accelerator, but we would imagine in the modern times, where they would, like, as a foundation, like invest in companies that were started by students and taking an equity stake. And now because of this, it is one of the most valuable yoga houses, internationally speaking, because some of these companies became very, very successful.
Wow.
In fact, one of my teachers was the executive director and the treasurer for a while. He was the CFO of like a very, very popular health food snack company that actually was listed on the stock market. You know, like there's not that many yogi brands that have gone so far. But this, you know, the point is that this Yogi Bhajan guy was a fake guru through and through. And I read about the details of his death. He died when he was like before 50. He had 3 different organs transplanted. Like he had both of his kidneys transplanted. What do you mean? What do you mean this yoga health thing? Like you should be healthy, right? And then the further sort of revelations of this, you know, this PhD in religious studies, you know, this guy just like went in on Yogi Bhajan, like vendetta. Just like interviewed the early students and like, you know, uncovered, like reports from them that the guru was only teaching. He was never demonstrating. Mm-hmm. He was just sitting at the front of the room, you know, fat and happy, you know, telling jokes and getting it done. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, so he was teaching it, but he wasn't doing it. But what about the people that are actually doing it? And I looked at those people and like, okay, so my assumptions here were still good, is that this is a great way to age, but we need to find the real source. What is that book that he brought over from India, right? And it was a book by this fellow named Swami Dharendra Brahmachari. And Dharendra was a super legit yogi in India. He had this big network of schools. He was the private yoga tutor of the Gandhi family and the prime ministers of yoga and the prime ministers of India. And one year, he went on his sort of sadhana, his retreat, where as you advance in yoga and you start to learn more of the esoteric practices, some of them require like really, really intense focus, and it's difficult to be in your normal life because of the traumas that come up. All right, like we learned from Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps the Score that trauma is remembered everywhere in the nervous system. Its memories are not just stored in the brain. Like everywhere where you have nerves, you could have a trauma, right? And that is what I realized is the true power of yoga asana, the positional style, the physical style of yoga, when combined with the pranayama, the movement of breath as energy. You can actually target these bundles of traumatized neurons, inject highly oxygenated blood into that region, and essentially like take this knot, this like you can visualize it like a PTSD knot of neurons, but by holding yourself in a specific stretch and putting all of your mind's attention in that spot, and then holding, and then you can in fact do some of the deepest trauma work that I've ever seen anyone do. Whether it's
fascinating.
Conversational therapy or some of this sort of somatic body movement work, a lot of it comes from the experiments that the yogis did, and it was just kind of like lost in translation and like sort of sanitized or repackaged or rebranded. And I think that there's an element of this that is like good because it allowed these practices to enter into the Western world, which was completely addicted on nicotine and caffeine, two drugs that lead to just like a horribly anxious society. But here we are, drinking our coffee. Can't live without it. But at the same time, there was a specificity and a reproducibility that occurred in some of these lineages of yoga. And I think that it's important for us as a globalized society where the East and the West have met and we're now doing business together and we're now getting married to each other, we're now like living with each other, that there needs to be a respect for the old Indian science of the soul in the same way that there is for the new science of Western medicine. And that's like an uncomfortable
Totally
thing for me
agree.
to say, because I went to MIT. Like science is my religion. And like I met the people, like the professors that I was instructed by. Like these are the people that are writing the book of science. Like if you could meet the people that were writing the Bible, right? Like I was in the room with these guys, right? And they are all extremely spiritual. My quantum physics professor was an intense, like yeshiva, like studied the Torah, like really into like the mystical side of Judaism. Like the director of the material science lab, his office looked like a Buddhist monastery, right? It's only the middle scientists that stick to the book. You know,
Interesting.
it's only the ones in the middle that are like so obsessed with the formulas and so obsessed with, what their professors and what their masters are saying to them. But the ones that are actually pushing the frontier of science, they're all doing God's work. Whether they
Man,
use
that's
that vocabulary or
fascinating.
not, it's like they
Yep.
are using the tools that we have to rediscover the formulas left by God, left by nature,
Mm-hmm.
left by Allah, left by whatever word you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all science, right? And when people say like I'm doing breath work, it's like, okay, which breathing pattern are you doing? What current thing are you struggling with? Because each breathing pattern is specifically therapeutic when done appropriately and in the appropriate context. And if you pair up a person with a particular malady, and you ask them to do a particular breath work, you can send them into psychosis because of this, previously mentioned release of traumas that happens in the nervous system. Like when your blood is super saturated with oxygen and every cell in your body is conducting like full-on cellular respiration, we like flashback to 6th grade biology, the way that our bodies just fundamentally make energy. We convert glucose into ATP, right? And oxygen is the limiting reagent. You can be malnourished and still have enough vitamins and minerals in your body to do cellular respiration, right? But when you're not breathing enough, one glucose turns into 2 ATPs. When you're super saturated with oxygen, one glucose turns into 36 ATPs. And you're producing 18 times more energy units in the presence of a supersaturated oxygen bloodstream. And that is, when I speak to executives, when I speak to athletes, when I speak to chronically depressed people that say that they don't have energy, I was like, let's first figure out if it's a physiological problem. Are you physically producing enough energy to make your life joyful? Breathe with me. You get someone that, most people can go an entire day without taking a deep breath. And if they do, then it's a sigh. It's like, and the yogis never sigh. It's always a tight, controlled exhale, because the exhale is how you activate different parts of the parasympathetic nervous system. And different, like if you exhale through the mouth versus you exhale through the nose versus you exhale from the right nostril, from the left nostril, like tightly from the nose, tightly from the mouth. Like each of these things activate a separate part of it. And so I just, when it comes to like what I've done with this book and getting out there and teaching this, sonic acupuncture at this music festivals, or like, corporate retreats, or even sort of on the spiritual side, these transformational retreats, I'll do like a one-day takeover. It's, I try to bring the specificity back into it, like the scientific rigor back into it. Because, we could talk about inner child wounds on a psychological level, or we can talk about the neuroscience of PTSD and how specifically this intervention will dramatically improve that problem. It's just a different conversation.
Are you talking just about breathing here? Are you also adding in the pranayama, the movements with the things that you do, or are you mostly focused on the what'd you call the breath work? The asana? No, those are the body poses.
Yeah, no. Asana, ASANA. That is the physical side of yoga.
Yeah.
Pranayama is the breathing side of yoga, and
Yeah.
then what this practice is that I do is called bhavana. It's Bhavana. And bhavana is specifically the combination of svara, which is mastering the science of the sound of breathing. Svara means sound or like vibration, with mantra being words of protection, right? And so basically, in order to master svara, you must master the prana, right? So there's some like levels to it, but when you do master the vibration, that's when we get into the really juicy stuff when it comes to like why we love music as humans. Like after this work and testing it live at these various music festivals and seeing the dramatic reaction in people's bodies in the presence of these sounds, I've come to the point where I believe that music has been reduced to entertainment. Right? It is one of the greatest forms of entertainment known to people, and we gather around music, we enjoy our lives around music, but like there's something here where music, it could be medicinal. Like we need to put some more rigor around this thing. Like there's too much misinformation about 432 hertz and 528 hertz. But digging into the history of this thing, it is in fact a commonality that every single religious culture around the world does two things. They have some form of solo contemplative practice, whether it's called meditation or bhavana or pranayama or prayer or, communing with the ancestors. Every single one has something where you're by yourself and you're thinking about stuff and you're thinking about good stuff, like how to be joyful, how to be compassionate, how to be generous. Like every single one is doing this. The other thing that every single one figured out is the use of frequency to modulate this practice. Right? In yoga, we have the sound bowls. Right? In Chinese Taoism, we have the gongs. Right? These bowls and these gongs are a specific diameter. And the tone that is played by that specific gong is determined by the radius, by the diameter of this circle. Right? If it's too small, it just doesn't hit. If it's too big, it just doesn't hit. But after thousands of years of making these things, they figured out that if we make it just right, when you play this gong and you think Namo Mitofu, and you hit that gong, it just gets you into some kind of psychedelic state. The Gnostic Christians, the more sort of like mystical side of Christianity, like they were the ones that invented the organ. Right. So that's why when you walk into church, you have that big piano that's, the pipes go all the way up to the vaulted ceilings, and the organist is playing the same chord progression over and over again, as the people, as from the village, are filing in for the Sunday service. They play the same chord progression. They're not doing it for kicks, man. They're doing it to get you into a flow state so that the sermon that's being delivered can hit harder. Right? And so what we talk about as sonic acupuncture is like this album of guided meditation tracks. We're making use of the frequencies that we can confirm affect the brain in certain ways. Like people are talking about alpha waves, theta waves, gamma waves, these kinds of things. So we've done as good a work as we can in terms of like isolating it down, and we are hopefully contributing to that science now by having live practitioners. The other thing is, so it's basically the specific tones that are kind of underneath each song, the musical key, because each musical key has sort of a different emotional vibe to it, right? And so like the three sequences that I teach are the 8 pillars of joy, the 6 anxieties, and the 4 compassions. And so each of these songs is written in a different key. So if you were to just listen to the song, having not participated in the breathing, not paying attention to the lyrics, then you would actually get into a low-level flow state, as if you were sitting at a slot machine or like playing a video game. Both of these things have been designed to engage you in a low-level flow state in order to make them more addictive, right? So this is not like out of left field. This is like actually battle tested technology that is taking millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Huge industries, right, are built around using sound to engage low level flow states, right? So we have the frequencies, we have the key, and then I just, because my personal style, I wanted some big drums, you know, like I love a flute, I love some waterfalls, but I programmed in some like really, really big drums to guide, and percussion elements to guide the specific breathing pattern that you're supposed to do for each one. So each track is at a different tempo, right? So like one of them is like boom, 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 boom. Then it's the long, slow, deep breathing one. Another one is like boom, 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 doom, doom, boom, 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 doom, doom, boom, boom, boom. And that's a separate one. But following along to the breathing pattern with the percussion elements, it just gives you, you know, something to focus on. And then the words that are playing are the mantra, right? And this is mantra is one of the most misunderstood things when it comes to spiritual practice, because a lot of people believe that mantra is a personal thing, that it's specific to you. And there is a form of mantra practice that if you were to work with a guru, which most of us don't have the luxury to have access to such a one, but if you were to work with a guru, then this guru would have such deep knowledge of you as a student and the things that you're struggling with, that the guru will give you a mantra, and you will sit with this mantra for the rest of your life. Because, you know, as it turns out, in the world of like trauma and like early life stuff, you know, the first trauma is birth, right? The second trauma after that, you know, is like the first time you feel shame, you know, like it kind of goes on from there. But like there's a school of psychological thought that says that every problem that you have in your life is actually some complex equivalence of your very first trauma, right? And that is the actual like historical, scientific, technical reason why a guru will give you a specific mantra to practice for, you know, at least until you've resolved it, which many people don't. But, you know, like when I see on social media how like people say my mantra is this, my mantra is it's like they're coming up with stuff. No. Even that guru didn't come up with the stuff. That guru knew the menu that has been experimented with over thousands of years, right? And what the modern neuroscience has shown with fMRI brain scans, with SPECT scans. There's sort of two groups of neuroscience researchers that are using different types of brain scans to see, you know, different kinds of problems in the brain. But, you know, I'm going to specifically focus on these fMRI scans, because the fMRI gives you a real-time, you know, moment-to-moment analysis of blood flowing through specific regions of the brain, right? And what they found when having these experienced long-term meditators in the fMRI machine doing these specific breathing patterns with specific mantras, you stimulate blood flow into a specific region of the brain. Like the difference between doing a pull-up and doing a bicep curl, or you're isolating this one part of the brain. You're not thinking about compassion generally. You're pushing blood into the specific region of the temporoparietal junction, right? And we know that from traumatic brain injury research that lesions to the temporoparietal junction, the right side, is responsible for your ability to hold multiple perspectives about the same situation in your mind at the same time. Right? So someone that has a lesion on the right side of their temporoparietal junction, it is impossible for me to conceptualize how I feel about this and how you feel about this right now. Right? Whenever you're in an argument with your romantic partner or your business partner, or, you know, someone that matters to you personally in your life, and you're trying to get them to see your point of view, it's like, why can't you just see it from my point of view? Come on. Yeah, it's so reasonable. It's like, well, actually, you know, they can't. They literally don't have the neural foundation to support such a thought pattern. Right? And this is the, you know, this is the dramatic, I think, conclusion that we arrived to, my colleagues and I, in terms of like writing the book and putting together this practice, is that most of our society is being run by people, and these people have undiagnosed, untreated brain injuries, and or they're just like dysfunctional or atrophied, right? Because just like the musculature, how a part of the body can atrophy after injury, you put it in a cast, it gets all skinny, right? If you intentionally develop mindsets that limit blood flow to certain regions of the brain, you will actually neuroplasticize yourself into having fewer neurons in that region of the brain. So it's not even necessarily that you have to get a lesion to the right side of your temporoparietal junction. But if you got the kind of job where you're like doing something that doesn't sit well with you morally, but you got to do it to pay the mortgage, to put food on the table. There's a quote in that movie about the 2008 financial crisis, Margin Call, right? The two guys are driving in the Aston Martin, right? And he says that like 99% of the things done in this world, good or bad, are done to pay the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in order to swallow your point of view, to swallow your pride, in order and do the work that you were just ordered to do, the mind, the incredible mind, so that you don't suffer with the guilt of that decision, will stop channeling blood into the temporoparietal junction. You live like that for enough years, you literally don't have the neural foundation, the basis to have empathy, because the part of your brain that's able to hold my perspective and your perspective of this situation at the same time in the same brain, it can't do it. I can think about what you think about the situation. I can think about what I think about the situation, but I can't think about what we individually think about the situation. And this is where the tendencies of narcissistic oppressors come from. Right? This is just one part of the brain. And we target 7 parts of the brain with this practice that are contributing to anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction, and all forms of neurodivergence that folks are talking about these days. I myself was diagnosed with severe ADHD as a kid, but the same regions of the brain are implicated in autism, Asperger's. Not every single form of neurodivergence, because there are some that are like from birth and these kinds of things. But when it comes to the autistic ADHD spectrum, like sonic acupuncture can fix that. When it comes to chronic bipolar and severe PTSD, sonic acupuncture can fix that. And we didn't invent it. We got this research from the US Department of Veteran Affairs and applied it and like molded it into the rest of the work on flow states from Stephen Kotler, molded it into the research that the audio engineers are doing with flow states, right? And we merged all these sciences together into this one sequence that people show up. And I didn't expect how well it would go, man. Like Burning Man was only the second time that we had performed it live. And you think at Burning Man, it's like these people have been around, right? They've been doing yoga. They've been on the spiritual path. They've been working on stuff. And every single workshop at the end, people would come up to me like after, just like I would see them just convulsing tears, just like uncontrollable, like just like, I'm like, whoa, like, whoa, maybe I'm doing something wrong, But then they would come up to me like, yo, man, I've been doing breath work for years. I've been doing yoga for years. I never got there before. Like, what was that? And I was just like, well, this is what I guess this is what happens when you do the recipe right. Like, it's reproducible. That's what it is. It's like, and we've been tracking every single person that ever came to one of my workshops, every single person that cried. Over the lifetime of us performing the sonic acupuncture, 32% in a single session without training, deep emotional traumatic release. And that's the, I expect that we will increase that number as we get better at facilitating, but the core science bits are there. and the data is showing that it's working in completely untrained folks. And when we do train people in it, it's 100%, man. Like this live online group that I started on January 8th, you know, it's everybody is sending me messages that are just like, you know, like I truly accepted forgiveness for the first time in my life. And because I had that moment, it unlocked, you know, like this whole bundle of relationships, and I was avoiding all these people because I wasn't willing to forgive them, this thing and that thing. Like this other person who had suffered from like severe stage fright was put on the spot for this one thing, and she was like, oh, I just did the inhale, and at the top of the inhale, just like you said, the subconscious bubbled up, and I was like, yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's not just live at the music festival, but like it can work when delivered through a digital medium. And so yeah, it's very exciting.
So you've got music playing that you create. Do you have a musician with you? How does that? Because you said we. How's it set up? Online and in person.
Yeah. So I say we as a, you know, just to make room for my alter ego. But no, after I wrote the book, one of my mentors, after I wrote the book, one of my mentors just had this conversation with me that pushed me into music.
Yeah, I'm just doing a podcast. Cut that out.
All good. Go ahead. Yeah, so when I finished writing the book, I went to Miami and I told one of my longtime mentors that I had written a book, and I showed him the book cover, and I was super proud. And he was very skeptical. He was like, "You wrote a book? Like you wrote all of it yourself?" I was like, "Yeah, man, I wrote a book." And he was like, "Oh, okay, cool. I'm excited to read it. Does it slap?" And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Does it slap?" And I was like, Jay, I don't understand. It's a book. Books don't slap." And he like leans back, takes off his sunglasses. "You're going to tell me that a book doesn't slap?" He's like, "Charlie, the only reason I hang out with you is because you're a good barometer for the slap. And you're going to tell me that books don't slap?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so." He's like, "What about the Bible, man? The bestseller of bestsellers. Them stories in that book move people. That's what it means to slap." Right? And I was like, oh, right. And so, you know, he proceeds to tell me that you might have the most important message in the universe, but if it doesn't slap, nobody's listening. And so I sat with this for like a couple of months before I decided somehow, like I just woke up and I was like, this is the direction. It was Christmas Eve, 2022. And I opened up the music software. I was like, I need to, because like when I was beginning, like the thing that really got my practice to deepen was that I would by myself do practices at home, like do sequences of breathing exercises. And at the end of these breathing exercises, there's often like a very long meditation period where you're chanting a mantra over and over and over again for 11 minutes straight, right? And the focus that it takes to keep your mind on a single idea, Ad Guru Name, Jugad Guru Name, Sat Guru Name, Sari Guru Deva Name, Ad Guru Name, Jugad Guru Name. It's like for 11 minutes, dude. Like, and when you're feeling all like gushy because of the exercise and the practice, you're feeling all good. You're just like, oh man, I don't want to do. But there were some very talented musicians that turned these mantras into songs, and I had a collection of these. And whenever I needed to do one of these mantras, I would play that song. And like some of these, like with the angelic vocals, they would just give me the goosebumps. And like, it all came together for me. I was like, oh man, perhaps the reason why I was able to go so deep in my personal practice was because I was using these songs as kind of like a walking stick, you know, like it was like kind of keeping me.
Almost seems like a catalyst too, like it just boom triggers you into that deeper into that state.
Yeah. I like to think about it as if you were, you know, like in the fog, right? And there's completely zero visibility, but there's a rope like connecting where you were to where you want to go to. And like you're just in the fog and like 360, you can't see anything, but you can hold onto this rope, and like pull yourself across one hand at
I
a
like that
time.
analogy.
Right? That's my visualization. That's the one I encourage people for, because really when you're in these like psychedelic meditation states, like you're trying, like you're in the same mindset as people that you're trying to party. Like you want to listen to some music, you want to dance, you want to do all this stuff, right? You want to get the, like really, like this is where ecstatic dance comes from. It's like, let's do some breathing exercise, let's do some yoga to wake the body up, to get us into an ecstatic state so we enjoy this dance, right? But and I don't want to speak poorly about ecstatic dance because I love it myself, but from a medicinal point of view, you're wasting the high. Right? Because in this highly malleable neuroplastic state, every idea that you introduce to your brain will stick a little bit more than when you're not. And technically it's not a little bit more, like the research that they've done with the, training military snipers and advanced experts with, under like transcranially induced, like electrically induced flow states, is that you can take someone that's a complete novice and make them a total expert in 5 times fewer days. So if it took 100 days to train a soldier how to go from being someone with aptitude with an assault rifle to being a top tier sniper, maybe that program would take 100 days. But under transcranially induced flow states, before your training sessions, it took 20 days. Right? So
you're
that's
saying
where,
like with ecstatic dance, like take what you're getting from that and then go practice a skill or something, make it useful in some way.
Take that juice and actually do a proper mantra meditation so you can believe that there's joy to be found in forgiveness. Right? Like, and this is the thing that the mantra people don't understand in Ubud Bali, right? Is that mantra is not something that you believe. It's something that you're trying to program yourself into believing. If you already believed it, you wouldn't need to meditate on this. Like, if you already lived with these principles that were conducive to a good life, you wouldn't need to come to yoga. Right? It's just that simple. Right? Maybe there's some like physical element of like health and maintenance, but if you really understood the nuances of the concept of the joy of forgiveness, the strength that it takes to forgive someone when you know they've wronged you, to create those new mental grooves so that when someone betrays you, your subconscious processes it as, they probably didn't know that doing that thing was going to hurt me. Right? Because we're so egocentric in our normal life that and it's not because people are narcissists or because they're egotists. It's because we literally have underdeveloped temporoparietal junctions, all of us.
Because we're human.
Yeah. No. More specific, we have underdeveloped temporoparietal junctions. This is why we live in an egocentric world. And it's not until you develop and increase the size of this region of the brain can you actually develop the capacity for stronger sympathy and empathy. Right?
Is this part of the brain that you mentioned earlier? Like, interesting. So is that where like rock climbing and yoga and surfing are those lighting up that part of the brain, or is this like, is that part of that? You mentioned those get us in the flow state.
Those are the flow state inducers, right? The flow state triggers, right? And so basically,
but the mantra sent to the specific area.
Yeah. So basically, once we get into a flow state where we have achieved this rate of increased neuroplastic ability, then it's time to reprogram your subconscious on the deepest level, so that and this is why we have these 8 mantras, right? It's like we have, these 3 mantras. It's the 8 pillars of joy, the 6 anxieties, and the 4 compassions. These are not things that any normal person can do. These are not things that any normal person can do. But the rational mind, when we speak about the joy of gratitude and the joy of compassion and the joy of generosity and the joy of acceptance and the joy of humility and the joy of humor and the joy of being able to change my perspective, right? When we talk about these 8 concepts, there's no rational person that can disagree with the idea that if you were to think these things, you would find joy. but we don't think in this way. It's not natural to the human biosystem to think in this way because we evolved from fear-based animals, right? Or we, depending on what theory of evolution you want to believe in, I don't really care, because the point is that we ended up here. We ended up here, and every human is born with this brain, and this brain has these relative sizes of these different regions of the brain. And now we know, and we can prove it with a brain scan, that if you do this particular breathing pattern with this particular set of concepts, and you really, really concentrate on the concepts, then you can stimulate these regions of the brain. They will have more neurons in them, right? And if you do the second breathing pattern and the second set of concepts, a different part of the brain lights up. And through repetition, these parts of the brain get larger, more not diameter wise. They're not taking up more space. They're just getting more folds, because everything in the brain is folded. And by having more neurons,
more gray matter,
and more surface area, more gray matter, more connective tissue, it allows the subconscious mind to process information differently. One of the most powerful parts of the brain that we target is called the uncinate fasciculus. And this is a network of neurons, basically like a road that goes from the back of your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that is you. It's your executive function. It's your personality. Every rational or strategic thought you've ever had came from this part of the brain, right? And this part of the brain is separated by the biggest fold of the brain. It's like there's this big fold that kind of goes into the middle, and then it kind of comes out the front, right? And on the other side of that fold is called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the center of your fight or flight response. And the way that the brain is wired is so fucked up in this regard. because sensory information goes from your eyes, down the optic nerve, hits the occipital lobe, where it's processed into something that it can make sense of, and then from there it goes straight into the amygdala. Auditory information goes, vibrates those little ear bones down the ear canal into this processing center of the temporal lobe and straight into the amygdala. And if the amygdala sees or hears anything that looks remotely like anything that it ever was scared by in the past, boom. They call this an amygdala hijack. It activates the hypothalamic pituitary axis, the HPA, and what you experience is total hypofrontality, meaning that all the blood flows out of the front of your brain in order to support the fight or flight nerves and muscles. Right? When someone's angry, when someone's anxious, they're not behaving like themselves, the clue is in the language. All of the blood has flowed out of the region of the part of the brain that is themselves. They are behaving in a completely reactionary, completely fear-based mind. There is no blood in the region that is them, right? And this isn't like, oh, I have my mama's temper. This is like, there is some evidence that relative brain region size can be inherited. There is some evidence on the epigenetic side of things that your health at the moment of conception and like through the birthing process, like your mental and physical well-being can translate to the baby's mental and physical well-being, but the jury's not out yet. But what we do know is that no matter what brain you were born with, no matter who in your family had the temper or had the depression or had the alcoholism, you can, in this life, do these practices to grow these regions of the brain that will eliminate that disease from your lineage. Well, maybe not lineage, we don't know yet, but it can definitely eliminate it from your current life experience. You do not have to be an alcoholic because your father was an alcoholic. You do not have to be chronically depressed because your parents were chronically depressed. We know that now. We don't know if the work that you're doing will, give your child a bigger amygdala, but we do know that by you having a bigger amygdala, your child's behavior won't trigger you, so you will be a kinder and much more compassionate parent, and that will probably help your kid with his childhood trauma. Right? So It's like, you know, what we are on right now. And you asked me about like, what's the mission? Without, you know, I didn't want to like sort of drop it without getting into some of the details of this, because these issues that are plaguing society and individuals are suffering from, we've been suffering from them for so long that we have grown into a sort of defeated mindset. And what this new research has shown, I mean, when I say new, I mean, like this paper that is the centerpiece of my book was published in 2009. Right? So that's 14 years ago. In the scale of science, 14 years is not a very long time for some basic science discovery to translate into a therapeutic intervention. Right? You got research, you got FDA clinical trials, you got this thing, you got that thing, and then you got this crazy kid who read all the papers and was like, hey, let me engineer these tracks and like teach this yoga the way that the original gurus taught it, and let's see what happens. And it's working. It's working, right? We introduced this therapeutic intervention into the market, you know, perhaps, you know, earlier than the powers that be would like it to, because the powers that be want you on that ADHD medication from you're 5 years old, so that by the time you're 15, they can put you on antipsychotics, because the regions of the brain that are targeted by that ADHD medication are all fucked, right? But now you're two line items in that profit spreadsheet, right? And then you got to take that thing that chills you out from the antipsychotic medication, because that has horrible side effects, right? And we have this, like, this is not a small population of people that are our age that are taking 3, 4, 5 drugs every day just for their mental health. Right? This is a very profitable, like, people being mentally sick is a very profitable thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
These songs are free on SoundCloud. Follow me on YouTube. come to the workshop, you know? But like, they don't want that.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, I love it.
The mission
I'm all about
is
holistic treatments.
Yeah. So the mission is really to create a course correction in the history of human society, where, you know, we do not need to live under this zeitgeist that, you know, that these diseases are untreatable. They're manageable, extraordinarily manageable, with the appropriate intervention. And as far as we know, there is nothing that can grow your amygdala in as short of a time as this intervention.
In terms of like frequency of doing these types of practices, like what's your typical routine, or what do you recommend for the average person? I'm sure that it varies depending on where we fall on the bell curve, but let's say the average person with burnout, you know, this is daily practice?
Yeah, the way to get started, 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes. I don't care how burned out you are. I don't care how busy you are. You have 5 minutes somewhere. And yeah, and then it comes down to accountability, right? So a big centerpiece of, you know, one of the chapters in my book is kind of like a synopsis of that book by James Clear, Atomic Habits. And that book was very, very important, I think, for the neuroscience of habit formation, because of two things. One thing was that skipping a day does not actually impact the long-term benefits of, or rather does not impact the neural growth over the course of building a new habit. I think in the history of, you know, forming good habits, people talk about, you know, going on these habit streaks, right? Like how many days can you go without breaking the chain? And it gives you a lot of pressure and a lot of motivation and a lot of social proof to not break the chain. But it also gives you a lot of shame when you do break the chain. And that shame will often lead to people no longer showing up to the group meetings, will lead to people, you know, it just like it triggers the whole depression thought loop cycle that we're trying to heal in the first place, right? So this idea that you don't need to do it every day is super, super powerful. The second thing is they talked about the scale of the habit and how many days it takes for your brain to grow the necessary neurons to support that behavior becoming automatic. And in Atomic Habits, they talk about how training yourself to drink more water every day, that could take as little as 20 days for your brain to actually show neural growth, and for you experientially to just drink more water. You don't need to think about drinking more water anymore. That's when a habit becomes completely automatic. It's just like you just do it. You don't think about it. You just do it. But so a more complex habit, such as running 3 miles after work every day, or doing an hour of yoga, this can take 250 days. 250 days. And we don't got that kind of time, right? But when I dug into the experimental design of this particular study that they found, this 20-day, 250-day thing, they did not account for flow states and the increased rate of neuroplasticity. And this is where the work of Stephen Kotler, and being sort of like the popular science author that has made this sort of enter into the cultural zeitgeist, but the work of like the Flow Genome Project and these various other interest groups that are funding science around these areas, is that when you take the neuroscience of habit formation and you combine it with the neuroscience of flow states and increased neuroplasticity, and you combine that with the neuroscience of extremely positive human traits such as compassion, generosity, and wisdom, I mean, yeah, you have a very powerful cocktail. You have a very powerful cocktail. And it just so happens that the yogis, they call these sadhanas. I mentioned that this famous Swami guy went for a retreat. They're generally 40 days. 40-day sadhana, where they believe that if you take a particular sequence, you commit yourself to doing this sequence every single day for 40 days. And the poses will teach you everything you need to know. This is language extracted specifically from one of my yoga textbooks. The pose will teach you everything you need to know. And it just like the constellation formed in my brain. I was like, oh no, the pose isn't teaching you. But over the course of 40 days, you're gaining the necessary muscles. You're tearing muscles and growing new muscles, stronger, longer. You're doing the same thing for your ligaments. You're giving time for angiogenesis. You're giving time for neural growth, right? And this final component of like, in the presence of a flow state, no matter how complex the habit might be, you can create it in 40 days. Like 40 over, 250 is not a clean number. So like 40 over 240, right, is 1/6. These flow state scientists are saying that you're 5 times more productive in a level 1 flow state. And we know that level 1, level 2, like as they match up with the jhanas, are more and more beneficial, right? So that's where I realized all the science was using different vocabulary to chase the same high, basically this exalted mental state. And it's very strict. These jhanas are not enlightenment. These are not nirvana. These are not the thing that Buddha talks about as like the ultimate peace, because the reality is once you stop breathing, you come back down. That's just a fact, right? And that if you train for long enough, your brain will grow the necessary structures in order to support this kind of positive thinking. But at that point, there's sort of philosophical work to do. But with sonic acupuncture, with the work with Don't Punk Out, with the organization that we started, the BAEWA, we keep it at this level of physiological improvement to support whatever you want to do, as long as that thing that you want to do involves being joyful, without anxiety, and with superhuman compassion. If those are not, if that's not your bag, then just don't talk to me. Like if you want to be miserable, that's cool. That's cool. But not everyone around you wants to be miserable. Not everyone around you wants you to be miserable. Right. So like, pay attention. Right. But in terms of like yeah, that's
Are
where
you
we're at.
supplying mantras with people that you work with? Because you said like it's not necessarily, you know, where you come up with your own, or is there space for people to create? Because it almost sounds like there's this whole thing about affirmations that's been going on for our, much of our life.
Affirmations are not mantras.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the word mantra comes from the two Sanskrit words, mananat trayate, which means, oh man, I don't want to be misspeaking on the thing here. So let me pull up specifically my resource on this.
Yeah, because while you're looking that up, that's what just comes to mind for me is that, because when you were describing mantras, and I think of, okay, this maybe affirmation is one of those things that kind of became something else than what it was originally meant to be, which is what you've kind of mentioned in a lot of today's discussion. And I'm just, the science of how affirmation and mantra differs. Is interesting.
Yeah, mananat means to think or to reflect, and trayate means to protect and to liberate, right? To think about protection. This is not an affirmation. This is protection. And what is it protection from? In Buddhism, they talk about in Buddha's final hour. So basically he spent all his life studying all the different yogas, mastering each of the yogas, but still something was missing. And so he, my interpretation of the story is he literally just like sat down underneath this tree and was like, damn it, I'm gonna find true enlightenment, or I'm gonna die trying. Like, he's just so frustrated. He's like, I'm just gonna sit here until I find nirvana or die trying, right? And so he's sitting there and he's he's doing the pranayama. He's like, he's getting there, he's in the 8th jhana, right? He's in the 8th flow state, right? They call it the deep samadhi sleep, when you're like, you're in a state of no thingness, right? Like there's complete non-separation between you and the air and the universe and the whatever. And this young woman is walking by, and it was customary at that time to, when you see these yogis in the forest, that you give them like a bowl of food, right? And so she left like a little bowl of food for him. And he's just like, fucking like getting high, getting on the jhanas, like it's not working. And he just like opens his eyes, like, this whole starving myself for nirvana thing just didn't work out. So I'm just going to eat this bowl of rice. Like, if I die, fine. If it's not holy, then fine. Right. But this little bit of sustenance calmed his physical body down enough to the point that when he re-entered that state, that's when the demon battle began. These are the final bosses, right? This is where I was mentioning earlier that philosophy comes into play a little bit here. But these demon thought patterns, in the Western world, you would call them, traumatic responses or traumatic coping mechanisms, right? You would call them, like, when you feel scared, or when you feel unsafe, or when you feel like your physical body is not well, like we all have coping mechanisms, right? And these coping mechanisms are so beautifully captured in the description of these 4 demons, the 4 maras, like, demon thought patterns. They're not demons as like in the way that the devil is a demon in the Western world. They're like, they exist within you, and you have the power to defeat them by the mechanism of certain actions, right? The first demon is Devaputra Mara. And Devaputra is the avoidance of pain by seeking pleasure. Right? It's the absolute fear of pain that is masked by a hedonistic desire for pleasure. And it doesn't even need to be hedonist. It can be Epicurean. Right? The difference between a hedonist is someone that overdoes it on the drugs and the sex, and the Epicurean is fine with just a little bit amount of drugs and sex. Right? But in the Buddhist philosophy, right, the seeking of pleasure as a means of avoiding pain, or as a means of avoiding stillness, is a seductive lure away from total peace of mind. Right, so that's Devaputra Mara, and most people are love Devaputra. I myself have a great relationship with Devaputra, right? But at least I know I can catch myself every once in a while. Second one, Skandha Mara. Skandha is the compulsion to recreate yourself when everything's lost. You got fired from a job, you had a big breakup with your business partner, you lost a bunch of friends, or you went through a divorce, and sort of feeling the separation and the exile in that fashion, right? Or you're an athlete and you get injured and you don't know, like, I don't know who I am without football. I don't know who I am without tennis, right? This is where Skandha Mara comes in. Skandha is the one that tells you, figure something out. You're great. Come up with a new identity. You got this. You got this. Right? So this compulsion to create a new identity, to create a new ego in order to save you from the suffering of not having an ego. This is the second demon thought pattern. Because truly, if you just sat there in that space where all the words that you used to describe yourself are suddenly now no longer valid, what's there? And it's a beautiful meditation. It's a beautiful realization when you feel what you are without the words that you use to describe yourself. But it just feels too good. We just love our egos so much. Like when one of my egos dies, I'll make a new one. You know, and I was at the point where I had 5 alter egos just on a backlog. In case any of these things didn't work out, I got a new one immediately hot swapped in. And a lot of people call this, masks, right? In the modern psychological parlance, right? Like, oh, you're masking, right? You're just like, these are your shadows, right? Your alter egos, your shadows, right? But like the origin of these terms comes from largely the work of Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was involved, I talk about this in one of the chapters of Don't Punk Out. Carl Jung was heavily involved with the academics, the first academics that translated these ancient texts from Chinese into German, from Hindu into German, from Sanskrit and Pali into German. There was this, it's called the School of Free Thought in Darmstadt, right? Basically like this just like, yeah, it was a school that was dedicated to the study of Eastern mysticism, and for the first time translating those works into. So most of the things that we know about psychological work actually come from this period of Jung's life, where he wrote a psychological treatment of Kundalini yoga. He wrote one of the chapters in the book. He wrote the commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is an ancient Chinese text about Qigong and subtle body energy healing, Chinese medicine. And so, yeah, it's like the lineage of these ideas was really what, for me personally, being like the nerd that I am, really brought it together. I was like, oh my gosh, like everything that everyone's talking about is just almost there. Like nobody's actually wrong in any of the spiritual work that, like, I spent all that time in Ubud, met a lot of people that were doing lots of practices. A lot of them were very opportunistic. A lot of them were just trying to get by. A lot of them, like, really their lives were actually changed by this thing that they were taught. And they were just only taught 80% of it. And what we really tried to do was, find that last 20%, like the origin of the idea, the translation from Chinese to English, going through, backwards to front in time and then forward to back in time, with respect to my own relationship with a disgraced guru, So anyway, we were on Devaputra and we were on Skandha. The third demon thought pattern is Klesa Mara. Klesa is basically the sense of entitlement to one's extreme emotions. It is the belief that this sadness that you feel, this anger that you feel, it deserves to be expressed. That's the compulsion, and you see this a lot with, like, the spiritual community speaking their truth. You know, it's like, no, you're just mean. You're actually just mean. And you're mean now because people were mean to you for most of your life. And, you know, your throat chakra was blocked or something. And I don't want to diminuate the reality. Like, yes, your throat chakra was blocked because you put a block in when you realized as a child that your opinions were not valuable to the adults. So you stopped speaking. And now you've had a little tiny awakening. And so you're swinging all the way the pendulum to the other side, thinking like, oh, well, I wasn't speaking my truth for most of my life. So now if I do speak my truth, it's freedom. No. It's a whole other form of prison. You're now in Klesa Mara's prison camp, talking about yourself like, you know, my throat chakra is unblocked. Ooh. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But easily treatable with the 4 compassions meditation. Excuse me. The 4th and final Mara, this is the one that's the most difficult to deal with, is Yama. So Yama Mara is the belief that if I just do this one thing and I do it well, everything else will take care of itself. Right? And this is like, we're talking about habits. We're talking about building good habits. The habit itself becomes a form of prison. Right? And that is that's why it was the final boss. And when Buddha figured out how to defeat this one, he awakened. Everything was like technicolor, like he's literally tripping on DMT. And he's just looking around and being like, whoa, I cannot teach this. It's far too radical. There's a story that's in multiple texts, how the first thing he thought when he descended from his final hour was that I cannot teach this. They will stone me to death if I tell them that this practice that they've been cultivating, this habit, is actually a prison in itself. Like, they can't. No. I'm happy I figured it out. I'm good. Right? And then he looks over and he sees a pond. And in that pond, there are some lotus flowers. Right? And there are some lotus flowers that are far below the surface of the water, tight. You know, the buds are just forming. There are some that are kind of like just peeking out of the surface of the water. And there are some that are standing tall in full bloom. Right? And this is when he resolved. He said, for the ones that have opened, I must teach. Because it is at this point where you've done this practice, you've liberated yourself from 90% of the things that one can be liberated from, and you're still suffering. You're still suffering the what do I do with this problem? What do I do now that I've liberated myself problem? That is, go to another land and tell the barbarians how wrongly they're living, and then oppress them with your point of view. That's what happens when you live according to Yamamara, when you believe that the way that you do things is the way that will solve the world. Like, I know, like, you know, like, this is something that I'm very, very cautious about. I didn't even want to start teaching. I just wanted to be the nerd that wrote the book. Like, I'll tell you guys how to do it, and you guys can go teach. Like, I'm nobody's guru. I'm a self-proclaimed regurgitator. But what I've learned is that, you know, my sort of style of science comedy is like, it's people, you know, it's working, right? And, you know, with the music, it's working. But, you know, I don't want anyone to think about me the way I thought about Yogi Bhajan. The way that, you know, when I was first getting into yoga and I did like a 30-day Bikram yoga challenge, like, look at what happened with Bikram. Look at what happened with Bhajan. I'm like, that's not me. That's not me. I'm just out here trying to perfect my own self to the point that I will one day no longer need to do these breathing exercises. Because, I mean, I'm not going to lie, man, I've been doing this for years. My practice hasn't been as rigorous as it is these days for a lot of that, but I still have a bad day and I still get triggered, but now my trigger goes from 10 minutes, 15 minutes of just like hysterical anger to 30 seconds. Right? And this is the thing that I didn't believe when I watched this lecture on YouTube in 2013, was that they call it the emotional affectivity MRI. And what it is, it's an MRI scan. It takes about 2-3 hours. You go into the machine and they show you a sequence of pleasant images, like like a sunrise or a sunset or a like a waterfall, right? And they're playing like pleasant music in the headphones, and then all of a sudden an image of a guy burning to death and the audio of him shrieking and screaming because he's burning to death. And in real time they can see in the brain blood flowing into the amygdala, initiating the fight or flight response, right? Activating all the emotional centers of the brain, achieving that hypofrontality, all right? And there's basically 3 canonical graphs that come out of this type of test, right? A normal person that has, a complete novice meditator, we're using the term neuroplastic training. So like someone without neuroplastic training will go through this test and they will experience a significant spike in the amygdala region, and it will take 5 to 10 minutes for them to return to baseline. So those are the 2 axes of the graph. It's like how big the spike is and how long it takes for you to return to baseline. If you put a psychopath through this test, which they have done in terms of like prisoners and this kind of work, but they have a very small spike in the amygdala region, and it takes 5 to 10 seconds to recover. So the recovery time is so dramatic, right? If you put one of these experienced neuroplastically trained Buddhists or yogis through this test, they will have a larger emotional spike than the normal person and recover as quickly as the psychopath, right? And this measurement of how much time we spend not in baseline, this is my thesis for business PTSD, which I write about in the book, is that the reason why psychopathic tendencies are rewarded in the business context is because the people that have these kinds of brains can very quickly return to rational thought, and they can make a sound business decision. And this is valued in the business world. And so what has happened is we have created this perpetual motion machine where psychopathic leaders are making psychopathic decisions and encouraging the underlings to continue to atrophy their own brains in order to cultivate this ability to return to baseline. But they're returning to baseline quickly by turning off the amygdala. And what this one test, this emotional affectivity fMRI test, proves is that with training, you can turn up the amygdala and recover just as quickly as if it's turned down. But on the other side is the neural foundation for true compassionate leadership. And I think this is possibly the most important discovery that scientists have made about about man's relationship to self. And I'm just happy to be part of the cabal of folks that are talking about this. Like this neuroscientist that published a paper in 2009, Professor Richard Davidson, he wrote a book called Altered Traits in 2015, which I reference heavily in my book. But it's more talking about it's an intense neuroscience book, and like got a lot of stories about the work with the yogis and Buddhists from the Himalayan mountains. Doesn't address the societal issues the way that like I've like sort of taken that work and extrapolated. Like, oh man, like if that's true, then this A plus B equals C, right? Like I wrote a book about business PTSD because I had some. Like I was 22 and I was in Silicon Valley and everyone was starting companies, And I was like, oh, like I'll start a company too, right? And so we had some co-founders, and we raised some venture capital money, and just all of it. The whole thing was a giant. Yeah, it was a source of great pride for me, and a lot of excitement, but also a lot of difficulty, a lot of stress. I didn't burn out on the first company. I started a second company, and then I burned out on that one. But the point is that like in my short business career, the disagreements that I had with my co-founders, that they were the great friends beforehand, and now we don't speak. And it was this sort of recognition that I had convinced myself that that was okay, because it's not personal. It's just business. It's fine. It's not personal. It's just business. And I realized that in my short career, I had these 2, maybe 3 little incidents that were enough to make me feel like I was shutting down emotionally in the totality of my life. Like my partner at the time, she's like, Charles, like, I don't feel you. Where are you? And I would say like, oh man, like work is just so intense. Like I just need to be like completely focused, and I just can't, like, it's hard for me to open up, because if I do, then I'm going to have to deal with all the other things that are happening, So I really believe that so many problems in romantic relationships are actually a symptom of ongoing business PTSD. And it wasn't until like basically like this was like post-COVID. I was, it was like maybe 2021, 2022. I was dating this girl who asked me why I wasn't starting a new company. And, I gave her a bunch of reasons. We had this whole discussion. And she said to me, she's like, it sounds like you have relationship trauma from your co-founders. Because that's the vocabulary that she was familiar with, that she was involved with, like through her work with her therapist, through the Instagram accounts that she followed. She just said it's almost casually. She's like, it sounds like you have a relationship trauma with your co-founders, and that's why you don't want to start a company again. And I was like, no, it's fine. It's not business, or it's not personal. It's just business. It's cool. It's not relationship trauma. It's not like a breakup. And then, but that sentence just really stuck with me, and I was like, hold on. And I went on the Wikipedia page for PTSD, and I looked at the symptoms, and I was like, I might just be a bitch, but I'm having a lot of these symptoms. And like, you look at the sort of the scenarios which could give someone PTSD, and it's like, living through a natural disaster, living through a terrorist attack, being attacked as an individual, like being raped, like all these things that can give you PTSD. But there was nothing about the severe backstabbing and betrayal that occurs in the business context, that people get wrecked over, that I myself got wrecked over. And there's no mention of this in the literature. And so I reached out to the neuroscience folks that I had worked with in my previous company. We ran a scientific due diligence firm, so I had access to a lot of scientists. And I basically did my own literature search, and I put all these papers together, and I held some like kind of discussions. I was like, hey guys, like, am I wrong here, or do these dots all connect? And we live in a society that has inadvertently been structured to be run by 500 bipolar psychopaths, represented by the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, the largest companies in the world that have the largest budgets, the largest number of employees. And these companies, we wonder, how can you have a policy that destroys the environment so dramatically? And then when someone finds out, you spend billions of dollars covering it up, rather than just saying, oh, God, shit, sorry, we'll fix it. right? Like the cover up is sometimes more expensive than what it would cost to fix the problem, right? How these giant companies can have no regard for their employees' mental health and work-life balance until regulators get involved. How come? How come? And my thesis in the book is that it's because the leadership is so traumatized that they don't care anymore. They just don't care anymore. They have so much PTSD from being hurt by other people in business, in personal life, being betrayed, that it's like, fuck you guys. My family's going to be fine. I built a bunker in my house in upstate New York. Fuck you guys. And unfortunately, that's where it's at. It's that the number of like awful things that you have to deal with as an individual on the road to getting into that chair, to becoming the CEO of that company. How many like shitty corporate political things you have to deal with, how many possibly actually political things you have to deal with, how many times your family you know, was not happy that you were working late, you know, like all this stuff just compounds and compounds and compounds and compounds until you have a brain that is so atrophied in the temporoparietal junction, that is so atrophied in the amygdala region, that it is no longer fit for duty. And it's that simple. It's not, they were probably a great person when they started. They probably still are a great person when they are themselves. But when they get triggered and they experience that total hypofrontality, they are not themselves. And that is the important thing to remember here. And so,
is that your ultimate goal, Charles, to kind of get to some of these folks? I mean, it seems like that would be your one of your ultimate goals, is to get these people doing your stuff, basically. Or have you had success with that already? Is it something that, people they're willing to, and on some level you've experienced that?
Yeah, indeed. I have not gotten to specifically the Fortune 500 yet, but the guy that invited me to Burning Man was Paul. He's the guy that basically brought LASIK eye surgery to America, and he's a wonderfully successful guy that has some extraordinary business PTSD. Like I told him about, like Paul and I have been old friends, and but we never like worked together in any capacity, just like sort of social friends. And I told him about this book that I wrote, and I told him about this stuff, and we did some meditations at his house, and he was like, "Whoa, will you come teach this at my Burning Man camp this year?" Like I had never been to Burning Man before, so it was a it was I was brought into your community by a member of that community, hyper successful person that had severe business PTSD and was looking for answers, right? So I mean, we have some pretty aggressive goals this year as an organization. By the end of Q1, being the end of March, we want to begin training one of the Fortune 500 CEO. Like we just launched the first, sort of group training on January 8th. It's 20 days in now. So we're going to wrap up this first training. We're going to launch some more trainings on February 8th. We're going to launch another training on March 8th. And somewhere in this group, we need to get to one of the Fortune 500 CEOs that is open to the idea that, because you got to understand, like, number one, it's difficult to reach these people because of sort of societal barriers. But number two, when someone is so successful, you don't want to hear like, "Oh, something's wrong with you," right? But it's one of these difficult messages where it's like it's not your fault. We were just operating in a messed up cultural zeitgeist, and you are a victim of that. But all those things that you experienced in life, that was personal. That did affect these regions of your brain. And through neuroplastic training, you can regain the joy that you had as a young person getting into business, wanting to create beautiful things in the world, wanting to create a legacy. right? Like, these are not bad things. Like, a Buddhist will not tell you that you should live completely without desire, right? That would be ridiculous. Like, you need to have, Buddhism is about eliminating desires. Like, if you want everything, right? Let's say you want everything. You want money, power, fame, sex, everything. You want everything, right? The practice of this, when it's asana, pranayama, the mantra, right, is to eliminate those desires one at a time, right? The first one that typically goes is money. And it's like, oh, you realize that money can't buy happiness, right? But then you look at all the rich people and no one's giving the money away. So money might be nice, right? But you sort of, lots of people in the spiritual path, they renounce money, right? They get used to like a lesser version of life, right? And then through the physical practice, you can develop a sort of sense of self-soothing where you don't need sex as much, right? But everybody likes to feel powerful. Like, especially you see this in the spiritual community, like this spiritual narcissism. It's like, oh, my guru is better than your guru. Like, my practice is older than your practice. I mean, even myself, right? It's like, I think my practice is better because some neuroscientists validated it versus, this guru that was from this village, from this place, right? We got that too, right? But, it's like, it's difficult, right? It's difficult to be like true to just wanting to help people because, then I want to be known. Then I want to get famous for the guy that helped you. Like, fuck. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you escape? How do you escape? And so there is this sort of element of, money, power, fame, sex. This is how Buddha beat the game. He was like, you can have all that. I got peace of mind. And my peace of mind doesn't end. It goes for infinity. And that's what I think is like the true power of the situation.
Yeah, I wanted to go, you mentioned this BAEWA that you've got going. This is the group. Can you explain, like, what does that mean? Is that an acronym? And is that what your current project is?
Yes. BAEWA is an acronym. It stands for the Big Amygdala Energy World Alliance.
Love it.
It's facetious in the sense that, I was really just looking for a two-syllable word that had a little bit of emotion behind it. But it's also, the reason why it stuck when we went through this whole sort of branding exercise was that it is easy to say. Nobody needs to know exactly what it means. But if you care to know what it means, then it really does ground you in the neuroscience of what we're working on. Like, I am not an advocate for meditation. Well, I am generally an advocate for meditation in general. But when it comes to the work that we do and the purpose of our mission, I'm not advocating for meditation. I'm not advocating for yoga. I'm saying if you breathe in this way and you think this concept while doing it, you will grow your amygdala. And if you grow your amygdala, then you are bulletproof to fight or flight response stimuli. If you do the next thing, you will strengthen the connectivity of your insular cortex, which means that every time that the insular cortex is connected to the vagus nerve, every time you get hungry, every time you feel like sex, every time you feel like porn addiction, every time you feel like smoking, drinking, whatever, having a highly developed insular cortex is what prevents you from succumbing to those addiction fantasies, right? If you grow the uncinate fasciculus, right, the superhighway between the back of your prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, if you strengthen the amount of, increase the number of neurons on that pathway, then the part of you that is you can finally, and for the first time, control the part of you that is scared. Right? That's the crazy thing about this, is that we talked about this like fear, anxiety, hyperfrontality thing, is that if you grow the neurons on the uncinate fasciculus, you can think to yourself, don't be scared. And your body will immediately respond by releasing the not scared hormones. It will completely interrupt the cortisol production. That's what these Buddhists and yogis were able to achieve. Like, they didn't know, right? They didn't know that, in terms of like the brain geometry, that if I think these concepts while I do this breathing, that these regions of the brain are going to grow. They just experimented over thousands of years. And what we have learned about what they have achieved is, in my opinion, one of the main vectors by which we will save this world. Because if you save the minds of the people that are making the decisions about the world, then they will save the world. Right? I don't need to save the world. I don't need to save the dolphins. Right? But I can heal the traumatized mind of the oil executive who is, making the choice to cut costs on the safety measures of the oil tankers, which is then leading to a higher percentage of these ships, leaking and destroying these natural environments, right? And that's a cost-cutting decision. The destruction of our planet comes down to a spreadsheet decision being made by a person with an underdeveloped amygdala and temporal junction. It's that simple. He's not a bad person, not evil. There's not some conspiracy that wants to keep you down. They're just traumatized. They're just traumatized people making decisions that are the best for them, and they no longer have the neurological capacity to see how this decision will affect other people. So, the BAEWA, the mission is to heal these 500 brains. And we will, of course, train everyone that comes to us. Like we've branded it like, like the BAEWA is a country without borders whose citizens enjoy, other like-brained individuals, right? We're not like-minded individuals. This is a like-brain thing. Believe whatever you want to believe, but you believe it with compassion. You believe it with joy, and you believe it without the neuroticism that forces you to oppress it onto me. Right? Because that's, oppression is not compassion. And this is sort of like our grounding is that, greed, anger, and ignorance, which the Buddha talked about are the three fundamental sufferings. These qualities, these fundamental sufferings can be eliminated through this neuroplastic training. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, what of these things that I've mentioned have come up in your practice? Because like it's the central nervous system. It's all there, and working with the spine and working with the body and working with the fascia. I do believe that the school of study of like chiropractorship it touches on many of the concepts that I've read about and studied and implemented in my own practice with yoga and these kinds of things. And I wonder, where you have heard some interesting overlap.
There's a lot of overlap, man. I mean, if you study now, what we're learning more about fascia, what you said before, where, you're breathing into these areas where you're trying to get oxygen. There was a Dr. John Sarno, and his whole thesis and theory was that basically areas of pain are areas of low oxygen. And instead of going and doing, there's the physical stuff, but his idea was, let me send a thought to that area that says, hey, let me put my focus here. And his hypothesis was that it was getting oxygen and pain was going away. People, just by reading his books, I mean, in the hundreds of thousands, reported back that my back pain is gone, this and that, or elbow pain, whatever. And that reminds me of the work that you're doing, is like sending that thought to that area. So, a lot of
That's
times
cool.
It comes up body, mind, and you mentioned some book, Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. There is no separation of body, mind. I love the example of phantom limbs. It's like, I just saw the other day, it's like if you take your hand and you put something that blocks your vision of your arm, and then you put a fake hand where yours would be, and then you start to poke or take a feather and stimulate the fake hand, your brain starts to think that that's your hand, and you start to feel those sensations. And then when they go poke your real hand, you don't even feel it. So that just the connection, the brain, it's very cool. And so on, like, that's an example to me that just really shows the connection of you can't separate mind and body. So the nerves that are coursing through the entire body, you've got this top-down approach of like talk therapy. But when you combine it with a bottom-up approach of getting in your body, which is why that's why movement to me is so important. And it's why I believe so much in these, yoga practices. It's like, but then when you can do what you're doing and then combine all this stuff, it's like, all right, I'm getting the movement, I'm feeling my body, and then I'm accessing where I might have pain or these traumas trapped, or the programming has them stuck in these areas. You can make a lot of progress. But, something that I haven't incorporated necessarily that much into my life is breath work. And, I do a lot of movement things. I'm big into sound and, sound healing and that kind of thing. But I think what you're tapping into here is like another level of just really rewiring your brain. This neuroplasticity is fascinating. And I go back and forth, frankly, with what I read of like, how much can we really change neuroplastically? Are we born with, I love that you mentioned sort of things getting passed down through generations. It's like my father was an alcoholic. I'm going to have a propensity for that or whatever. And yeah, there's definitely a genetic component, but man, if we can change, if you're telling me that we can get in there and stimulate these parts of the brain and grow the amygdala, that to me is like, boom, that's fascinating. Because then we're not trapped in this, we're not a victim then. It's like, I have the power to change this about myself. And that's huge. And then not only that, but then the things that get layered on, like business traumas. I mean, we're every day, or whatever you're in, there's like, you got to have a tough conversation. There's someone that's said something, and these little mini traumas, and then they create our vision of the world. But to me, it's real that like, it's no different than flossing. Like you gotta hygiene. How do you maintain hygiene on your brain?
Yes.
Just like you maintain hygiene on your body. Go do yoga, go stretch, floss your teeth, because otherwise you let all this shit build up, and then what do you have? You have shit. So that to me all falls in the same vein. That's why like Bodywork to me is so important, because all this shit builds up. It's like sometimes you need a little something else. You got to get in there and clean that stuff out.
Yeah, get some floss. Get some floss in there.
Floss that gray matter and clear it out so it can grow. So it's fascinating, man. I think there's just a lot of crossover, and even combining certain things. Actually, I wanted to ask you what your take, or do you use any kind of psychedelic therapy? Have you ventured into that, or do you view it as not necessary with the work you do because you're stimulating that state?
Yeah, I have I actually, maybe it's not so complex. I will not do DMT or ayahuasca. I won't do it in the crystal form, and I won't ever go on a shamanic journey, because I know from a neuroscience point of view that the thing that is happening to me when I self-induce these psychedelic meditation states, it is a DMT release. There is not a naturally occurring psilocybin in the human body. There is not naturally occurring lysergic acid. That's the components of mushrooms and LSD. But we do have DMT. Our body produces it. It's stored in our brain. The theory is that DMT is the chemical that facilitates long-term potentiation, which is the mechanism by which short-term memories become long-term memories. Right. And so they believe that the reason why DMT is secreted in a dream state is because that's part of the brain's self-cleansing mechanism. It's like we're clearing out the RAM. What did we learn today that needs to be stored in long-term memory? And they also believe that, dreams, like the things that you're seeing in the dream state, is actually you having a closed-eyed psychedelic experience from the little secretion of DMT. Right. And so that little secretion of DMT is enough to make your long-term memories. It's enough to give you dreams. But what if you got at that store while awake and fully sober? That, like, DMT was the reason why I had the hardest trip of my life in November 2015. I just didn't have the language to understand it. I didn't know that that's what was happening. But now I do. Right. So I know that I can self-induce a DMT trip whenever I want. You give me an hour. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I have the necessary, like I've built up certain regions of my brain over the years of doing this stuff, that if I go into a meditation session with that directive, I will get there.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes time. It takes like, I can't do it in 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, I can get to a very, very satisfying runner's high. And that's just
Mm-hmm.
based on the neuroscience of how, your body reacts to stimulus, right? So the first thing that your body secretes from a neurotransmitter perspective is endorphins, right? They used to
Mm-hmm.
believe that endorphins were responsible for the feeling of runner's high. But then some neuroscientists recently, I want to say like in the 90s or early 2000s, I referenced the paper in my book, but they found that after the release of endorphins at about the 10-minute mark, there's a release of endocannabinoids at like the 17-25-minute mark. And when you look at the size of endorphins, the endorphins are not able to actually cross the blood-brain barrier. So this
Mm-hmm.
thing that you're feeling, this joyful sensation, it's not due to the endorphins. Endorphins are pain relievers, right? The highness, that's coming from the endocannabinoids,
Mm-hmm.
which is why people that run every day don't understand why people smoke weed. What's the point? Right? What's the point of smoking weed if you can just get it every day on your daily run, right? And it's actually better for you, because the endocannabinoids are much more beneficial for your body than the external cannabinoids, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
entire sort of conversation around marijuana is that it's medicinal, right? Let's talk about medicinal flow states, right? And so when it comes to like the other ones like mushrooms or acid, I find the way that society has treated the recreationalization of mushrooms to be rather irresponsible. The treatment vector is absolutely profound. I'm a huge believer that if you give someone with severe PTSD, severe anxiety, severe depression, you give them a proper dosage of mushrooms, and you spend 2 hours in a therapy session with a licensed psychotherapist. Doesn't need to be an MD psychiatrist. Most likely they'll give you some kind of pharmaceutical thing. It can be a psychologist, but it needs to be someone that is trained, right? Like doing mushrooms with your friends isn't going to help you with your anxiety. Doing mushrooms with a therapist or a shaman, right? Then when you use the word shaman, you deal with like, who did they train with and this thing, that what's their lineage, So there's the worst thing is that like I was living in Miami before Burning Man. And at Burning Man, as you know, I got married and moved to Bali. But when I was in Miami, the mushroom chocolates were flooding the scene. Like everyone had mushroom chocolates, the cute like Helvetica branding, you know what I mean? Legal, right? Or it was from a state that was legal, but somehow it ended up in Miami. And you would see these kids in Miami. I don't mean like young kids. I mean like, our age, like 25 to 35-year-old people out at the club, out at Soho House, out at, Do Not Sit, right? And Miami is like a categorically or historically been a cocaine city, right? But now you've got this culture of casual cocaine usage that is mixing now with the casual usage of psychedelic mushrooms. The
Mm-hmm.
neuroplastic effects of psychedelic mushrooms in combination with the extreme dopamine effect of cocaine is an extraordinarily pleasurable combination. It feels good because those are like it's like serotonin, mushrooms hit the serotonin receptors, cocaine hits the dopamine receptors. That's 2 of the 5 major neurotransmitters. It feels good. It's horrible for you. The psychosis that you can send yourself into when you have like a paranoid cocaine thought while you're in this highly malleable neuroplastic state, it means you will remember that thing. You will traumatize yourself on a casual night out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super, super like be safe. Like it doesn't matter if it's legal. Be safe. Right? And the thing about ketamine, oh my gosh, like nowadays, like with all the ketamine clinics, right? Everyone's on ketamine, right? Because
Yeah.
those same people used to do cocaine, but now the cocaine is just so dirty that everyone would prefer, like, all the ketamine that everyone has at these parties is medical grade. Where are they getting it from? They're getting it from CVS via Mind Bloom. All right. And if you've got, let's say you've been prescribed ketamine intervention because you have severe anxiety, severe depression. If you then proceed to, let's say you even do your therapy properly, right? Like, you do the ketamine, you do your therapy, you experience that dramatic change, which is scientifically sound. It's absolutely, it works. It absolutely works. But then if you take some more ketamine when you go to a party and you have an uncomfortable situation with another person, you just re-traumatized yourself. You just created a new instance of PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's extraordinarily dangerous, the usage of psychedelics in these casual party situations, because the things that go down in casual party situations are often not great, right? There's alcohol involved, and alcohol is just, it increases aggression, right? There's not a safe container, not safe people, not people on the same mind wavelength, like, it's just, the 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 Ubudians, right? Like, the people of Ubud, they don't go to parties anymore. They go to gatherings. They don't
Mm-hmm.
they don't call doing a bump in the bathroom they call it a ceremony, right? They're going to gatherings, doing ceremonies, taking medicines, right? And just because you change the vocabulary doesn't mean you're changing the underlying neuroplastic effect of these psychoactive drugs. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm going to do mushrooms, I'm going to do acid, but I'm not, I was, my onboarding into this world was very safe. Like I don't do it unless I know that the situation that we're going to be dealing with is, around people that I'm comfortable with, that the environment is comfortable with, that if I need to, if I really feel uncomfortable, that I can get out of there and I can be safe, right? Like, so these are things that I go through in terms of my pre-filter. When
Mm-hmm.
someone somewhere is like, hey, you want to do some mushrooms? I was like, dude, we're on a yacht in Miami with a DJ. No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you. Hand me a glass of champagne, please.
That
Right?
makes total
But
sense.
yeah. And so, and I think the education's just, the people are so excited about being able to do the drugs that they're not thinking about, is it safe? And I think personal safety is key. Personal safety is key. But yeah, and once you get far enough along, like, this, I mean, like I said, like, no mushroom or acid trip I've ever had, no candy flipping, music festival craziness, all the things that we did, all the medicines that we took at Burning Man, nothing compares to the trip that I can get through meditation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trip. It's like, the drugs are better, right? And there's a neurological explanation for why the drugs are better, is because we just talked about dopamine being cocaine, serotonin being activated by mushrooms. But in that flow state book, The Rise of Superman, they talk about the 5 neurotransmitters that contribute to flow: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin, anandamide, right? These 5 neurotransmitters match up to the 5 most commonly abused drugs in our society, right? Serotonin, it's affected by mushrooms, but more specifically by MDMA. Dopamine is cocaine. Norepinephrine is the precursor to adrenaline. This is speed or Ritalin, any kind of amphetamine. You have oxytocin, which is the opiates, heroin. And you have anandamides, which are weed. Every single cannabinoid is binding to the anandamide receptors, right? And so, part of the research that they did in this book that they reported on is that they did some experiments trying to externally induce the flow states in the concentrations that they found in these animals, and they gave the rats strokes, like literally strokes, right? They just died, right? And that's how they discovered that when you get yourself into an endogenous flow state, your brain also produces the inhibitors that prevent itself from overheating, right? And so once I learned from a strange source, I'll let you know, is from Russell Brand, right? When Russell Brand put the different styles of yoga comedically into different types of drugs in terms of their physical experience, and then I read this flow state book where it was actually talking about how these things, I was like, oh man, actually there's a triad here, right? You have the neurotransmitter to the drug to the yoga, and we can, once I made that triangle in my mind, I was like, okay, these yogis are just getting high. These yogis are just getting high. It's great. Think about how trivial it is in the modern world for us to get a little messed up. If you live in one of the states where these things are recreational, you can go down to the weed shop. If you don't, you can go down to the liquor store. It's so trivial for me to relieve myself from the burden of consciousness in the modern world. But back in the day, they didn't have that. So, what happened is these people just experimented with unlocking pure joy from only air. From only air. What are you talking about? That's crazy.
This makes me want to do something, Charles, like, because I'm all about experimenting, but figuring out what's the best way to heal somebody. Next time we're together and you're doing something, I would love to like treat somebody after they've been with you. We could figure out how that would work, or maybe before, maybe after. But I think it'd be really fascinating. See if we could attack. I just feel like we'd be able to hit the whole trifecta of whatever it is of neuroplasticity. There might be a cool way to combine those things.
That is a very interesting idea. We could. Yeah. So this study that I pulled, that the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs did with these Navy SEALs that are having extreme PTSD. What they did was they would have them do surfing to induce the flow state, and then therapy for 2 hours every day for 2 weeks. And these people were like severe, like heavy dosages of medication, like really like the worst cases. And by the end of this 2 weeks, 100% of them were off medication, and they were all reporting massively reduced symptoms. And like if we were to do something, I think that would be the structure. Is like, you have a client that's coming to see you for some work, and maybe 30 minutes before they get started with you, we take them through a sequence that, we don't have to get them into full like psychedelic, I'm losing my mind seeing different timelines, but just even getting them into that state of runner's high, right? Yeah. Level 1 flow state, right? Where your body's extremely oxygenated, your mind is open to these alternate pathways, and then you do your fascia work and your bone work, and I think it could be very, very powerful. Yeah,
I agree. That'd be cool. We'll have to play with that a little bit and see if we could do something there.
Yeah,
that's it.
Maybe we can have a Buddha Lounge event in LA.
That's a great idea.
Yeah,
that's a great idea. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, you heard it here, people. Buddha Lounge fundraiser party in LA. we're gonna do some breath work and body work, and then yeah,
I love that. I
heal
love that.
some trauma. Little ecstatic dance. Yeah, yeah,
Amazing. And how do people find you? Socials, online?
yeah. So I started in. So I was completely off social media throughout my spiritual journey. So this is, I've just made the accounts for like my Instagram account is at Don't Punk Out. We have a YouTube channel. It's Don't Punk Out Book. We have limited content on both of these things, but there are things happening. There are things happening. So we will have like like YouTube live meditations. We will have like deep descriptions of different neuroscience aspects. I'm planning on, some of the most well received content that I've been posting on Instagram is actually just me taking a screen recording of reading a scientific paper and highlighting important text. It's like, people love to listen about science, but I think there's, especially amongst the science interested but not scientist crowd, there's this kind of like beleagueredness of reading that article that says a new study says da 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 da, and you have this like journalist just giving you their read on what the study is saying. It's like, no, people actually dig reading the story. So we're gonna have a lot of content of just like, these papers that I reference, like the bibliography of Don't Punk Out is basically like, the breadcrumb trail that I use to find the magic witch in the woods, And so like anybody reading these papers will come to, hopefully similar conclusions if I'm not, completely off my rocker. But yeah, aside from Instagram and YouTube, you find us at don'tpunkoutbook.com to pre-order the book. And as soon as it's ready, I'll send you a signed copy with the ebook and the audiobook. And if you're interested in the neuroplastic training, it's BAEWA.org, BAEWA. And that's where we'll be posting. So currently the program that's running is the Amygdala Mastery Visa, right? And this is simply, we do the first level of 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day for 40 days. That is enough to grow your amygdala sufficiently to the point that we can introduce the second level, at which point we increase from 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. That's it. Right. But the full workshop, like the full process, like if we were to really like get the nut as quickly as possible, the full benefits, that's the 45-minute hour-long workshop that I taught live at Burning Man. But if you were to do this hour-long sequence every single day for 40 days, the level of mental bulletproofness that you would experience, the dramatic increase in your capacity for empathy and sympathy, the dramatic ability to recategorize bad things as good things so that you can keep moving. It's like, it's having experienced it myself, like as a guy with severe ADHD, anxiety, possibly some ego problems, relationship with my father, relationship with my mother, like the dramatic experience that the dramatic shift that I experienced going from just doing yoga, just doing meditation, to doing the specific reproducible sequence of bhavana, right? To the point that I don't even like calling it breathwork. Like we're doing bhavana, because all this other breathwork stuff, it's like, I don't know what they got going on, but I know what we got going on. Gnarly.